And eventually, when the Northside people collapsed through COVID, that was the end of the Northside people at the time, because there was no more advertising. People weren't advertising, everything closed down. So it's pretty much out of a job that I'd been in for 20 years and really liked. But at the same time, it was a rut. You know, it was a comfortable rut, but it was a rut nonetheless. So when I got the opportunity, when that collapsed, the Sunday World offered to take me on full time, and that's what I did, and that's where I am now. Or Crime World, as we're now known. So it's a completely different shift from, you know, doing stories about somebody's dog got lost or somebody's cat stuck up a tree, to doing more kind of serious crime specifically and gangland stuff. People like Nicola Tallant, they're the main stars. But I do the more groundwork of writing about crime, and it's interesting, for want of a better word, grim. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of crime out there, but it keeps us in a job, I suppose. Yeah, you become like, I think, you know, I don't want to compare ourselves to doctors and nurses, but you just desensitized to it a little bit. You know, it's just another crime, another victim, and you move on very, very quickly. Occasionally you might meet somebody whose story would kind of stick with you. It's not directly related to crime, but I think we were talking about it before we came on, and this is back in the Northside people days. We did a book about the Stardust fire, and that was something that, you know, at the time was a forgotten about story on the North Side. Those people had been trying to fight for justice by the time we came along and started working on it for 20 years, and they'd gotten nowhere, and nobody cared. You know, it was over. So through the Northside people, before I came along, they'd been campaigning for the families and writing about them for years and years and years. When I met them, I remember I'd gone to a 20th anniversary event to do a story on them, and I had a dictaphone at the time, and I just was putting in tape after tape after tape, listening to all these people's stories. And I was driving back with my photographer at the time, Darren. I was going, how do I get a 600-word story out of all these tapes? I've got like 4 hours of people's stories here opening up about their loss and whatnot. And he was like, write a book about it. I was like, but it was a light bulb moment. I was like, I'd never thought about writing books or anything like that. Just a bing. And when I went into work the next day, my boss, Tony McCullough at the time, said, Darren was mentioning you might be doing a book about the Stardust. I was like, I think it's a great idea. And he went, I agree. So we wrote a book about it, myself and Tony. He did more of the kind of investigative element to it, the background to it, and the investigating, the Butterleys who owned Stardust at the time, whereas I did more of the human interest. So I was in people's kitchens, hearing their stories of loss. And it was just, at the time, it was 48 people were killed, and it was the worst fire disaster in Ireland, one of the worst fire disasters in the world in terms of casualty rates. And they were just forgotten. Nobody could give a shit. Nobody was prosecuted for it. They got like paid shut up money at the time, like a few £100, because they were basically working class people. So they're told, you know, here's some money and never speak about this again. And what really rankled was different people were given different amounts. So it kind of divided them all, you know, but only for one family, the Keegan family, who persisted. They became the Stardust campaign, and they got as many other people involved as they could. But it was really just them, Christy and Keegan, who lost who 2 daughters there, and Antoinette Keegan, whose 2 sisters died. And Antoinette was in the fire, and she was badly burned. And they just were persistent. Like they got a memorial set up and campaigned for justice, as they saw. So that was the premise of the book. And unfortunately, the book came out in September 2001, right when 9/11 happened. So it got completely, it would have been a big story at the time for Ireland, but it was completely, you know, bankrolled to the back of the papers. So it was just unfortunate. I have to say, it did generate a bit more publicity for them. It was brought up in the Dáil. There was a bit of momentum there. And then it was another 20 years till they finally got the tribunal that they were looking for, which finally found that, you know, the finding of that they were looking for, that they were unlawfully killed, those people. It was hard to put it aside, what those people had gone through. It was really, really horrible. Like, it was terrible what happened. there was no support schemes for them. There was no counselling, even the medical care. You know, it was really third world stuff, and hard to figure out that was existing in Ireland that we have now. You know, it was really, really backward stuff, and just how they were treated. There was always this myth, if you like, that the doors were chained, right? That they couldn't get out because the doors were locked. And Christy Moore wrote a song about this. He wrote a song about the Stardust. And in that song, there's a line about, I can't remember the exact lyric, but it's about the doors being locked and chained. He got sued or his record company did, by the Butterleys who owned the Stardust, saying that was never proven in a court of law or whatever. Basically, get all those, I think at the time, was it CDs or tapes, all out of the record stores and destroy them. He couldn't. The song was banned. The song was banned because he had that line in it, right? So there was always this. The families, the survivors had said, we tried to get out this door. It was locked. There was chains locked around it, and we couldn't get out. And you know, loads of people died for that reason. But that was never, you know, in a court of law. And it was always this kind of like urban. As it turns out, that was absolutely true. That did happen, and that was established in the tribunal, in the court. Those people weren't lying, like, and that's part of the injustice. Like that's actually what did happen, and I wouldn't say there was a cover-up, but it was just like their truth didn't matter, so they were just pushed to the side, and that's grave. That's part of the injustice that they suffered, like over the years, that wasn't rectified until the tribunal, only in relatively recent years, established that actually did happen. You know, and we've seen it again. Like there was another horrible nightclub fire, the one in Switzerland, and they're talking about doors being blocked. Yeah, no lessons learned. I think their fight continues. I think particularly for compensation. But I think that tribunal inquiry that was held there and gave them some peace. I think, you know, unlawfully killed. I think that was the finding. That's what they wanted. You know, so that means something to them. If it doesn't mean that much to us, it means something to them, like to the people that they lost, that they were unlawfully killed. So, you know, Antoinette stepped down now. She's not involved in the campaign anymore. I know there's lingering battles and arguments over the compensation thing. But I've kind of moved away from the story now myself a little bit. I'm not really in contact with them, you know, but it was a fucking terrible fucking chapter in Irish history. It was awful. In Ireland, like, we were thankfully oblivious to all this stuff. But, you know, like the mothers and babies' homes, and what a strange, weird, backward country Ireland was, you know, at the time. And Stardust was just one element of that. I think that's what gives us a bit of cynicism as well, doesn't it? Like, you know, we're kind of like, oh, we're great, we're Irish, you know. Yeah, we got a lot of fucking baggage. You know, there's a lot of background dark shit in our history, and not that long ago, you know, in our lifetimes. And I think that makes us a bit cynical in a way. You know, we don't trust politicians, and we don't trust figures in authority, particularly religious ones. I think that lingers. I think that baggage is still there, you know. I'm not particularly interested in politics. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but they just do a job like everybody else. Some of them are, I presume, are in it for the money. Some are in it because they actually believe. We've got a real problem with people against immigration. That's a real kind of touchstone. There's a lot of anger out there. There's a lot of hatred, and, you know, against foreign people, and it's nasty. It's really nasty. Like, it must be difficult to come to Ireland, you know, I think, for some people. I really feel for them. Anytime I talk to anybody who's not from here, I wonder, you know, have they experienced racism, and what's their experience? Invariably they have, you know, be it somebody shouting at them on the bus or something like that. And I just kind of feel, I think it's pretty tough, you know. Your circumstance, you're coming here from another country probably because you had to. You didn't really have a choice, and then you experience somebody being nasty to you because you're not from here, you know. And I just don't like the whole Ireland for the Irish thing, and I don't like the tricolours on lampposts. You know, when I see that in neighbourhoods, I think it's like not even a passive aggressive symbol. What are they saying? Like, what does that mean? You know, you see that in the north, right? You see that in the north, where you see Union Jacks in particular areas and tricolours. I get that, because it's that's a long entrenched history, and it's sending out a signal, isn't it? It's like, this is our patch. You know, this is this belongs to us. I mean, you see it here in Dublin. What are they saying? Like, this is our estate. Don't come in. I don't like it. You know, and I think that's not just an Irish problem. That's our predicament, our challenge. That's across Europe, isn't it? You know, so I don't know. It's pretty nasty. I don't like it, and I feel for people that come here. You know, I root for them, and I hope they're okay. Like, every single story is different. I was talking before we came on here that there was a murder. Well, there was a killing in Dublin yesterday, and I got into the office, and it happened not far away from where we work. So that was back to basics. That was literally going into the office, find out just roughly what happened, and, you know, we'd get a steer from various contacts about what may or may not have happened. But the only way of finding out is just to go down there. And so you go down there. In this case, it was a man in his 50s had been stabbed to death by a woman, who then stabbed another woman and attacked herself. So it was all a bit murky. But to go down there, what you see straight away is the scene is cordoned off. Police won't talk to you. They used to, not anymore. So you gotta try and talk to the neighbours, and some of them they might talk to you, but they don't want to be identified. You know, they don't. So you gotta be subtle. You gotta be careful. You gotta be sensitive as well. Somebody's just been killed, so you don't like barge in and, you know, start flashing your press card and shouting questions. You got to go down there and just try and find out what happened. And in this particular case, the neighbours did speak to us. They happened to be Egyptian nationals that lived on this particular street, really friendly people. And they came down and they were just like gobsmacked. A little quiet street just in the shadows of Croke Park. An area that would have had its issues back in the day, but you know, they wake up and there's Gardaí everywhere in forensics, and, you know, a house that they would have passed on their way to work is now all sealed off, and there was blood stains on the door. So it's quite, you know, it's quite dramatic and grim. And that's I hadn't been to one of those scenes in quite a while. It used to be a lot busier in Dublin when the gangland stuff was going on. There was a lot more of that going on. But murders like that, that's not gangland related. That's the nuts and bolts of what we do. If something like that's what we call breaking news. And that's the only way to get the stories to go down there. You know, sitting behind a screen or going on the phone will only get you so far. So we come back then, we piece it all together, and we have other sources that fill in the gaps a little bit. And it's all online these days, so it's instantaneous. You know, we used to have a little bit of a grace period if you're writing for the paper, that you could correct as you go along, but it's so instantaneous now. We're up against our rivals as well, so they're putting their stuff up as quick as possible. So it's turning. I was sending pictures from the scene back to the office, and they're adding to the story that's already online, and then updating it, and then it has to go out on social media. So you've got to be fast, but you got to be careful. You can't. There was a lot of speculation about that particular scene yesterday, about who's involved, what happened, and where it happened. You can take that on board, but you can't say it as categorical fact, because you're wrong. You know, and you'll get corrected, and then it doesn't look good. You know, it's a credibility issue. So you got to park all that, and you got to like siphon through it and pick out like what do we know, and put that out there as quick as possible, as carefully as possible, and with a bit of sensitivity as well. Somebody died, you know. But that's the nuts and bolts of what we do, you know. I don't enjoy somebody dying. I enjoy the fact that, you know, it was proper old school, on the street, back out, doing a story, talking to people, finding the story, getting the elements of the story, doing it quickly, doing it well, doing a good job, and putting it out there. Every single day is different. If somebody says that about their job, you're probably not going to be getting into the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday grind, right? Because you wake up, you never know quite what you will be doing. It can change. It can even change within an hour. You could be working on something and you have to park that because this has happened. So there's a dramatic element to it, you know, and it can be tiring. It can be exhausting, particularly over a busy news day. But those days go really quick. So when I started off, journalists would have, you know, a contacts book. You would have politicians in there, you'd have Gardaí in there, and it started to change. Now, I'm only speaking for myself, because other journalists would have their own relationships with Gardaí and politicians and whatnot. Some would be closer, some would be looser. But from personal experience, I would have had Gardaí contacts that I could ring them and they would know me and I would know them. I built up a relationship with them where they could trust me and, you know, because I'm asking them for information. And they would give you a steer. You'd hear something happen, you could ask what happened, and they would tell you. But that relationship between journalists and Gardaí became very fraught. There was like basically rules brought in with the Gardaí to not speak to journalists anymore. And so what you'd get a common response was, ring the Garda press office, ring the Garda press office. Because they have a dedicated press office for journalists to ring, which was always there. But they would just give you the basics that you already knew. A man in his 50s was killed, a woman's been arrested, but you knew that. But what you used to be able to do was ring a Garda who would be involved in the case or know somebody who's involved in the case and go, I'll come back to you on that. And they would give you some detail, a little bit of an insight into it. And then that's how you checked it out. And we would say according to sources, you know, and we never reveal who they are. But I think that became quite fraught over the years. And those particular Gardaí that I would have known personally, either they're not in the job anymore or they would be like, it's against the rules. And that's kind of, and I'm absolutely just saying this from my own personal experience. Other journalists probably have better sources than I would have, or, you know, it's still in contact with them. But it's just not the way it used to be. So we have to kind of rely on other avenues of information where we can. My dad was a journalist, and when I started to get into journalism, I remember him saying to me, he never said, oh, you know, go into journalism. He never said, don't go into journalism. But he was saying, look, you'll never be rich. You know, it's not the best paying job in the world. I wasn't getting into it for the money anyway. But at that time, it was even called the sunset industry then, because the sun was setting on it. You know, the days the newspapers were coming to an end. And that was when I was starting out. Like, but so when the internet came along, that was the death knell for newspapers. They thought, and it didn't quite, like records. They did vanish for a while, and then not the newspapers vanished, but they kind of, you know, records came back. But when news started going online, the big challenge was, well, how do you make money out of putting content online and asking people to pay for it? And we are just doing that now with Crime World, and it's working. It is working. Sales they're always on a downward trend. So the people I work for could see this happening, and they said, well, we just got to put it online. And initially it was all free. So we're like, well, you know, how do we now expect people to pay for it? So we start putting it behind paywall, but a little bit, you know, more investigative work into it, a lot more exclusive stuff, and it's working. We can see it. It's I'm sure for them, it's gratifying. It's a relief for me because it keeps me in a job. But we now have a subscription. You have to subscribe to a lot of the work that we do, which I think you should. You know, why? You know, why should you get stuff for free that's being produced by journalists in Ireland who are putting a lot of work into it? I think you should pay, and I think we're not charging, you know, price of a cup of coffee or whatever, for good journalism. And like I said, it is working. I think that is the future of it. Journalism, they were saying, you know, it's kind of come to had its day. I don't think so. I think it's just going to change, and I think it's going to change in ways for the better. And I think it's going to be a lot more interesting. You're going to get a lot more content, for want of a better word, more video and more insightful stuff. And even the stuff that we do, I find interesting. The big cartel, international drug stuff that we do. Some of my colleagues they know it inside and out. And I read their stuff myself because it's bloody fascinating. Whether you're into that or not, following the trials and tribulations of the Kinahans, you know, who are now, I think they're right up there. Like they're like the in the top rank of global international crime syndicates. And following, you know, the Gardaí's attempts to try and take them down, get them out of Dubai effectively, where they're hiding out. You know, it's a battle, you know, between the Gardaí and these cartels, and they're starting to dismantle. There was this super cartel of international gangsters, of which the Kinahans were just one part, but they're starting to take down their allies, and they're getting these guys. Rafael Imperial is one, an Italian guy who they got in Dubai, and he's like a massive criminal, really connected with the Kinahans. They got him back, and he's turned into what do they call him? super petito or something like that, which means he's basically grassing. You know, he's under protection and all the rest of it, but to avoid, you know, lifetime sentences, he's starting to give the authorities information and spill the beans. It's like watching a movie unfold in real time, and it's real. And these people, you know, they cause untold misery across the world, but they're so big. Like, they're so big. Like, they're massive organizations. They're not just like little drug runners. And you're talking all these shipments that we see in Ireland that are starting to be busted. I think it was like 2 tons they got off the MV Matthew there that was stopped at sea, where they had the Army Rangers basically intercept the boat. It's like out of movie stuff, you know. And these are the Kinahans. Like, these are they came from Oliver Bond Street in Dublin, rose up through the ranks, and are now global players in this. This is what we do. Like, this is what we're really good at. Like, and I think that stuff is really interesting. I think people like to pay for that. I think, yeah, they should. Well, on the back of Stardust, then I thought, hey, writing books, great. You know, this is something I really got into. I'd like to get into. I thought maybe I'd do that. My friend Paul Howard writes the Ross and Carol Kelly series, and when he wrote his first book, we went to the book launch. We thought, that's it. You're like, in Ireland, you write, you become an author. That's it. You just become an author. Oh no, it'll pay the car insurance for a year. You know, that's the reality of it. But it wasn't just about the money, but I thought maybe I could do that as a job. Maybe or maybe not give up the journalism, but write books instead. Maybe. But I was disabused of that very quickly because, you know, you're not really doing it for the money. But it is interesting. The next one I did, actually on the back of the Stardust, was Christy Dignam's biography, because he would have been, as a Northsider, aware of the Stardust. I think he read the Stardust book, he said. I just wanted to get his story out in print. So I sat down. I'd never met him before. I didn't know that much about him. But he was a bloody interesting guy, like a bloody interesting story. And his war stories would make your toenails dial back. He was basically, I'm sure everybody knows the story. Christy Dignam is the lead singer of Aslan, one of the biggest Irish bands at the time. They were right up there with U2, and then Christy got addicted to heroin, and it completely imploded. They were right on the cusp. They were neck and neck with U2, and I'm talking in the early 80s. They had an album out, and it was like a #1 album. They'd gone to America. They were about to crack America. And he tried heroin, and that was it. That was Christy's story. And we all know that he just went down a rabbit hole. He lost the band. He nearly lost his family. The whole thing fell apart. And then there was a resurrection. He got his shit together. They came together to release one song, Crazy World. And then they were back. They were back as Aslan. Now, they never quite got back to where their potential was. But his story about how he navigated that and survived all that and beat heroin addiction and his trials and tribulations, himself as a character was great. Interviewing him in his bedroom, and you'd just be like, one story after another. All I had to do was turn the dictaphone on and then transcribe it. Done. You know, it was brilliant. We knocked that book out in a few months. You know, it was great. That's what I thought I'd like to get into, was books, like doing that and doing biographies. One book tends to lead to another, right? So somebody will read that and they'd like it, and they get in contact with you and ask you to write their book. Finbar Fury approached me on the back of Christy Dignam's book. Somebody approached me then about Sinead O'Connor. They kind of didn't work out, but other ones did, you know. And the next one after that, I think, was the Miami Showband book in the South. And that was a strange one, because I had no interest, or not no interest, but I had no knowledge of the North and the Troubles and whatnot. And that was a direct story from the Troubles. Basically, it was the Miami Showband, who were pretty big at the time, who would be travelling around Ireland, and they were pulled over at a fake checkpoint coming back from the North one night. And the story goes that the fact they thought it was a British Army checkpoint just on the north side of the border. It was actually renegade loyalists, UVF, who planted a bomb in their bus. And the idea was that the Miami would then carry on towards Dublin. The bomb would explode, killing all of them. And then the loyalists in the north could kind of say, well, look, we can't even trust show bands. They're IRA gun runners and bomb runners, and they would close the border down, and it would really cement Northern Ireland, British Northern Ireland, as opposed to the Republic. And that I think that was the general gist of it. It didn't work out like that. As they were putting the bomb on board, boom, blew up, killed the bombers, killed 3 of the band. 2 of the band survived, of which one of them, Stephen Travers, the bass player, I wrote the book with. And that was mad, because I'd read about this story and there was nothing about it. Like, there was nothing. I read one small article in a kind of like Ireland's, top 100 stories of the last 4 decades or something. And the Miami got like that much. I was like, what? And I was just kind of, what's this all about? And it was music related as well. And I was going to write a book about the Miami Showband. I called Stephen Travers, who lives in Cork, and I said, I'm going to write a book about the Miami. And it changed. He went, yep, let's do it. I went, no, I'm writing about the Miami. What do you mean? We're not doing it. It was his book. It became his odyssey again to find the truth and justice, like similar to the Stardust. But he was just a brilliant person. He became like a spokesperson for truth reconciliation platforms for the North. The one thing that stood out, I read an interview about him, was, right, he said after his bandmates were killed and he survived, he was shot badly and ended up with dum-dum bullets, and he when he got out of hospital, he was like 23 years of age, right? One of the biggest bands, he knelt at the end of his bed every single night and prayed, not just for his bandmates, but for the bombers, for the people that killed him. He prayed for them. I was like, what? What the hell? And I asked him about this. I said, what? He said, absolutely. And I still do. What a story. So when I got involved with Steve, and the first thing we did when I met him, he said, right, let's go. And I said, go where? I just met him in Dublin to sit down, have a cup of coffee with him. He said, let's go to where it happened. I was like, what? So we jumped in his car, we went back to the scene where it happened, and he stood, it's a little side road near Buskill, just right at the border, and there's a main road here, and they pulled the bus off to a side road, and he told me exactly where he was standing, where the bus was, where the bombers were, and it was chilling. As he described it, it was like he was there. He was imitating where he stood. They opened up the back of the bus. He walked around to say, please be careful, because my bass guitar is in there. And they up to that point, it was all very civil. They were saying, how are you? And we'll just have a quick checkpoint, we'll let you on your way. When he went back to get the bass guitar, one of the soldiers elbowed him back into line. It got all aggressive. And he was imitating, he was telling me, he was showing me exactly where he was standing. And when the explosion went off, it blew him and his bandmates, who were all lined up at this side of a hedge, over the hedge and into a field, right? And then we walked down into the field, because while they were lying in the field, the other gunmen came down into the field and finished them off, shot them. So he was lying there, and one of the bandmates was trying to get him up off the ground, and they coup de grace, they killed them. And he was showing me exactly where they were lying. It was really chilling. Like, I remember it was a really cold winter's day anyway, and this had happened, I think, in July in 1975, so it would have been a summer's evening, but he was saying everything was exactly the same, like the hedge is the same, that tree is the same, other than the temperature of the field, he was saying everything was exactly the same. From a vague interest in the North and the Troubles to just deep diving into that, on another occasion, he found out where one of the surviving bombers, who had served time in prison for it, lived in the North. So we decided on a Saturday morning to get in his car again and go to the North and go to this guy's house and knock on his door and say, will you come out and speak to us? This is Stephen Travers. I'm Neil Featherstone. I'm a journalist. We're writing a book. And we could see in the house the curtains kind of moving. There's people in there. We're going, hey, we know you're in there. Come out and speak to us. We just want to talk. He didn't come out. The naivety of doing that, of driving into, I presume a loyalist area in a Dublin reg car on a Saturday morning. It just struck me on the way back, because Stephen then was driving. He's like, I think we're being followed. And only then I was like, what are we doing? This is crazy. And I spoke to other journalists who were more, and they were going, that's just crazy. You just don't do that. You know, not that anything would potentially happen, but it's you just don't do that. You don't doorstep, you know, people like that and expect no, you know, repercussions. It was just mad. Like, I didn't know what I was getting into, and the book turned out, and it was pretty successful. And then Netflix came along, and they did a drama on it. He's still campaigning. Stevie's still out on the road. He still plays as a musician. He's still written his own book now, called The Bass Player. And it was just these books, like these whatever you want to call them, they kind of bring you out of your own life. Like, I was still doing journalism, Northside People still at the time. And then you go off down these avenues for months and months and months and months of research and stuff you had absolutely no knowledge about, and just being bamboozled by it. And this is the whole premise of Crime World. We're fascinated by the darker side of things, aren't we? Like, stuff that is obvious and light and whatnot, it just doesn't grab you the same way as the more darker elements of human nature. I think there's a kind of voyeuristic element to it as well. I don't know. I think maybe there's an element of it's not happening to me. You could view this stuff as happening to other people and kind of going, well, there's a remove there. There is an element there of people do find it interesting, more interesting than the lighter stories that would be in the news or the lighter elements of human nature. I can't pin it down. I don't know what it is, but it absolutely exists. It's absolutely true. I think we are. I don't understand the psychology enough of it, but it is true, isn't it? It is. Like, we just are. It's something that's frivolous and light, just doesn't hold your engagement. It's like if somebody says something to you, like a compliment or something like that, you go, yeah, that's nice. If somebody says something negative to you, right, or something negative happens in your day to day, that lingers. It's that survival, potential for conflict thing that stays with you longer than something that is of no threat. I could be a little bit skewed here in the answer, but it's something related to that. And I don't know exactly what the connection is, but it is. We are, and we're a warlike species. From cavemen right up to modern day, we fight, we kill, we survive, and it's that element of it that holds our interest. Why exactly? I don't know, but people are, and they pay for it. They want to read it. That's why in our line of work we need journalists. You need people, not AI. I'm not sure if journalists are right up there. The number one job that's going to be replaced by AI. It might be up there, but it's not the number one. But I can absolutely stand firm on the fact that 20 years from now, 30 years from the next generation, there will have to be human, real journalists, because you can't trust that stuff. You just can't. And you need somebody to, as flawed as we are as well, we make mistakes, but at least we can be held accountable to it, whereas some machine just churning out stuff can't be. So I think, to answer the question, absolutely get into journalism. It's great. It's good. Specifically, true crime journalism is very niche. Obviously, it's just one avenue of it. It's really, really interesting. And if you have an interest in true crime, you'll never work a day in your life. You'll get paid for doing something that you would be doing at home. But just generally speaking, yeah, it's great. It's a good job. Absolutely. And I think, without getting too highfalutin about it, we do need to hold people to account. Politics is the obvious one. I'm not particularly interested in that, but I guarantee you for a fact what we do in Crime World and Sunday World, some of those people, a lot of them will never see a day ever in court. Not one day will they spend, because justice will never catch up with them. But they will be on the front page of the Sunday World or Crime World online, and for what they did or getting away with, or because we're ballsy like that, we'll put them out there. Other news organisations might not go that far, because legally it's a minefield as well. You got to be very, very, very careful. But we're pretty bolshy like that. And we will. That's without being high court of justice land here. But that's sort of satisfying as well when you kind of see those people. And these are bad. Like these are not just somebody that did something wrong and made a mistake. I mean, they're vicious. they've killed people, or they've involved in gangs, or, you know, and like I said, the justice system can't pin them because they got to follow the law of the land, understandably. And they'll never see a day in court. They'll never have justice, but they will be out it, you know, and they don't like it. It's bad for business. It's really bad for business to see your name and your details about, you know, what you've been up to in a national newspaper or online. So do that. Do it for that reason. Featherston Hall. Huh? Featherston Hall. It just goes on and on. This has been literally following me around since I was born. People get really confused by it. It's not double-barreled. It's spelt all wrong. It's feather without an A, stone without an E. And in fact, nobody really calls me by that name because it's just too long in my job. They call me Fanshawe, which is the anglicised version of Featherston Hall. For some reason, they call it Fanshawe, like St. John Gogarty is St. John Gogarty. So I'm not known as Featherston Hall, but anywhere I go, the name is spelt wrong. People pull it up all the time. It's just, like, I don't know, I used to find it like a bit of a millstone, but now it's, you know, it's my name. In all my family, we have short first names because the surname is so long. It's just a weird name. My brother is known as Pigeon because one of his friends' mums couldn't pronounce Featherston Hall, so she did a word association. Feather, bird, she went with a pigeon. So he became known as Pigeon, and that's his name now, Mark Pigeon. He doesn't even have the name Featherston Hall anymore.